I believe I can create things, and there was Paw Patrol, Viacom, for actually preschool kids. So, and that was one very first step into this world where I thought my son back then was 4 years old. I thought, can I create a show, an interactive show that my 4-year-old son understands instinctively?
Welcome to today's episode of the Beam podcast from Super League. I'm your host, Matt Edelman, the President and Chief Commercial Officer of Super League. We help brands and intellectual property owners enter the immersive web, or as I've started calling it, the 3D internet. The 3D internet is a place where Gen Z and Gen A spend a whole bunch of time, and it is increasingly a place where brands are spending a whole bunch of money. It starts with immersive spaces and games and experiences built inside platforms like Roblox and Fortnite and Minecraft, but it is increasingly expanding to the use of 3D tools to bring immersive commerce and other capabilities into a brand's website. Our job and the goal of this podcast is to explore how and why brands are making decisions to get into this space and to create immersive experiences, whether on external platforms or as part of their owned and operated environment. We ask questions around what they should build, how they are going to engage their audience, how they're going to amplify the presence of what they create, and ultimately measure the results of the resources they put to work. I am excited to introduce Mike Koehler, the co-founder and chief creative officer of a company formerly named Lily Studios, now part of the Service Plan Group. Mike, it's great to have you on the Beam podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Mike, where do you live? Where are you based?
I'm based in Lisbon, and very west from Lisbon, and actually the most western part of the European continent.
Very nice. Well, thanks for joining me from a distant part of the world from where I am here in Santa Monica. So I always like to make sure that people get a little information about our guests. And if I'm not mistaken, you've got a relatively unique part of your history. You were a pro footballer. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was very young when I had to make the decision becoming a pro footballer. Actually, the day I got my contract to sign was the day I stopped playing football, and because I really wanted to study architecture. And that was an either-or decision. Funny enough, neither of these two plans worked. And so today I'm here.
So it was get on the field, maybe be world famous as an athlete, or study something that most people don't really understand until you explain it to them. And you chose the latter, and neither happened.
I know, yes. So, I mean, I would have probably, retrospectively, 5 years of being a pro football player wouldn't have been a bad decision. But
I think 5 years of being paid. Yeah, 5 years of being paid to be a pro athlete or getting a chance to tour as a musician. Those are pretty unique. But okay, so you didn't go for being the athlete. You decided to go into studying architecture and then decided to make a change, or how did you end up from architecture to getting into design and advertising and ending up where you founded a really innovative company?
Yes, probably. Honestly, it's just something like the internet happened. So it was the mid-90s when all these decisions came up, and it's basically to a cascade of decisions. I suddenly was very clear to me that I had to study graphic design, but yeah, full circle now. In a way, today I am kind of working in part as an architect, building virtual worlds, virtual buildings. And so in a way, kind of became the architect I always wanted to be, just very differently than I originally expected it.
I do see how the skill set, kind of connects to the design work that I know you've been capable of doing, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. I guess when you're creating buildings digitally in today's world, you're really diving headfirst into 3D asset creation and 3D design, which is a place where we as Super League spend a lot of our time. we think of it as the 3D internet. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but do you, look at immersive platforms or 3D creation tools? People have used the word metaverse. We don't use it so much anymore because it's a bit of a bad word. How do you define this space that we are operating in and that you're, pioneering in?
Yeah, for me, it's really about a completely, entirely spatial world, right? So that we can create. So now for me, it's really a fundamental transformation of the entire digital ecosystem. So, and metaverse is really, it's a fraction of that. And I can give you a perfect example. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, the MSG Sphere in Las Vegas made quite some headlines when U2 premiered there. So, and that's a good example because suddenly there's just new forms of entertainment coming to life. We've seen a lot of artwork from Refik Anadol who used AI, but also used this spatial component. So I think it really touches all sorts of industries, verticals, areas. And ultimately, I believe everything we know today about the digital experience will become sort of spatial, sort of, a spatial, more human experience. And that's what excites me very much. So, and this goes far beyond this one part of the metaverse. And that's, how we look at this.
I know a little bit about your company because we met a while back through one of your co-founders, I believe, and a good buddy of mine, Jordan Udko. And at the time, this is, I think, at least 2.5, 3 years ago, you were referring to the work that you were doing as being in the spatial computing space or spatial design space. It wasn't until last year, or maybe it was earlier this year, that the notion of spatial computing had a brief, rise to pop culture awareness when the Vision Pro was announced. So how did you sort of understand, spatial 2 years prior to Tim Cook mentioning it, and now has the rest of the world caught up, or is there still a disconnect and people don't yet know what spatial design and spatial computing really means?
No, well, I think funny that I mentioned this because it's definitely true that since June, a lot of people, much more than before, understand or have a slight idea what we're doing. Before, you would fight some conversations about explaining people what a creative studio for spatial computing is actually doing. So that announcement definitely helped. I honestly can't even tell how we decided in the beginning for this name. I mean, we were absolutely clear that what we were working in is, as I said, we were fundamentally believing, we had this vision that there will be a transformation into two directions, basically, and both has to do with transforming it much closer to human nature. The first was that we thought actually it has to be a live interaction. So that's actually literally years ago. We did a lot of interactive live streaming, explored a lot of that, and then started to exploring in these live environments, virtual experiences, spatial experiences, because we knew it has to be a live conversation that is much more human, much more direct. And the second piece, I always believed in that the digital experience should become spatial because it's fundamentally our human way to navigate all sorts of our life, our content, so to say, as human beings. As I said, once we have the technology to do that, then this will be the dominant technology there is, and there will be this transformation. Nobody can stop it. So that's how we decided to go this way.
I like the way you put that. So the human way of interacting around you and with the environment that you find yourself within. I guess you could kind of harken all the way back to the first use of remote controls, right? With televisions or controls for gaming, and you have this device in your hand, and that graduated to a device that was self-contained, and the content that you were interested in was in the actual device that you were touching and using. It started off with the cursor experience or typing on a tactile keyboard, That has advanced, of course, to touch screens and using digital screens to move the content around. And we're starting to now see that digital screens can be a gateway to any place where you find yourself. As you think about, that transition and what the experience is going to be through digital devices, is it really going to be spatial? And I'll use that word. I think of it maybe, is it really going to be three-dimensional, whether it is content that is on the screen that you care about, or whether it is content that is connected to what you're doing in the real world? Is 3D just the future for all, digital device enhanced engagement?
Yes, I mean, there's two aspects of it. First of all, for me, I totally believe what will always be superior is anything that brings us closer to our human instinct, right? So, and you can go way beyond any first remote, etc. But it's like 100,000 years ago, the world we understand, how we survive, works totally spatial. So that's a very instinctive human nature that we all have. So I feel right now we are making this big leap forward to actually into the opportunity to create experiences that we can do much more instinctive. So we don't have to learn how a smartphone works, how we operate with all these things. We actually, I believe, I can create things, and we can talk later about it probably. We did a show for Paw Patrol for Viacom for actually preschool kids. So, and that was one very first step into this world where I thought, my son back then was 4 years old. I thought, can I create a show, an interactive show that my 4-year-old son understands instinctively how to participate, how to do that? And that's what really was very exciting, to see him and to understand that actually, yes, we can. This technology allows us to do things that become much more instinctive in all different aspects. So, and then the next part, I think, is, yes, I do believe we will see a lot, and if not all of it, in some kind of spatial translation. And now the other question is virtual VR basically just an interim bridge solution to really get into an AR world where most of our content becomes an AR experience connected to our world, really, because I think that in general has been, a massive exponentially more relevance, because suddenly these things happen. Not only it's interesting, but they happen in my world. So how could it be more relevant? If we find a way to do this and craft this in beautiful experiences, I think that's what it's really going to be.
What you're talking about a little bit, and when you mention the Paw Patrol experience, you're observing your son, it feels to me like you're tapping into a little bit of the science of how our brains work and what it is that makes a spatial experience so instinctive. So I know that you've thought about this area quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about where you see the science of it all?
Yes. So actually, it was one of our topics we were thinking about for quite a while in the team, and specifically one of my lead architects, Daniel Vera. And so we were always driven by this idea of something we always knew, that actually we are able to absorb and consume so much more content, we feel, in space than we can on any interface in 2D. So we stepped into this and did some research. And so ultimately what we found is, and that was the answer to that. So our brain can subconsciously consume per second, per minute, 183,000 times as much information as we can do consciously. So that means being in a space will tell me about this space 180,000 times more piece of information than reading about it, watching a YouTube video about it, listening to a podcast about it. So, and all sorts of really conscious consumption of content, which is basically everything we do today, whatever the channel is, whatever the medium. So, but again, being somewhere and being immersed into something is not like 10 times more effective, etc. We're talking about 183,000 times. So we have a hard time to make things smell and stuff.
Right.
So let's take a couple of things down. But I think that is really why spatial experiences are so fundamentally more powerful than anything we try to achieve in 2D.
183,000 times more information per minute or
Per
whatever,
second, whatever
period of time. Okay, so now Super League and to some extent, a large extent, your business, our job is to help brands figure out what the spatial computing world can mean to them. And if I'm listening to this podcast, which I hope every brand on the planet chooses to listen to, and I have the opportunity to create a space where my customer base is going to absorb information 180,000 times more avidly or subconsciously than when I send them to a mobile app or a 2D web page. Sounds like a pretty big opportunity. So what should brands start to be thinking about as the real value they can achieve, knowing that AR is not mainstream? How do they get started? How does spatial start to mean something to them today?
I think the fundamental, the real solution is in finding an original idea and finding a real value to be in that space. So what is it you try to achieve in a spatial experience that you could not do anywhere else, right? Because the number I gave you is obviously, that's great, but that doesn't mean I show you 180,000 pictures more. And
Sure.
I make the video 180,000 times longer. That obviously doesn't work. So I have to find a way. I have to find something that is actually, that really is a spatial experience. That's, I think, really first and foremost a conceptual exercise, because as much as as I just mentioned, right, I can't make your flagship store smell the moment you enter today. That might come, but today it's rather limited. On the other side, and that is, I think, a massive opportunity, which is very much, totally uncharted territory. I think most experiences we see today are basically a replication of real-world experiences. So if I look at a lot of e-commerce stores, for example, it's like the virtual version now of a flagship store experience of any sort. But I think the opportunity we have here, we can do in a virtual space things we can absolutely not do in any physical space. And that leads to a really conceptually full new concept of actually what is an e-commerce experience? What is a flagship store? What is me as a brand really trying to do once you enter my space? And and I think there is fundamental solutions and completely new solutions. That's for me, definitely step number one. Try to understand conceptually what is the experience you really try to create here. What's spatial about this experience? Where's the spatial relevance for this? And that goes much further now. I think we have also fantastic tools today to build bridges between 2D and 3D. So it's not an either or decision where it's totally encapsulated in one world or another. I think we can build perfect bridges between these two worlds to also bring people over, because it's not that we switch and then tomorrow everything is spatial and everybody knows how to do it. We have to educate people. We have to bring them along. And I think that's another big conceptual piece that we should be very careful about. How do we introduce these experiences and how do we make these things accessible? From where, to whom, when, etc.
Interesting. I guess there's a project that we've talked about working on together, which is to help sports teams create an immersive commerce extension of their existing websites, whereas most sports teams don't typically invest a lot in pioneering user interfaces or UX on their websites. And in many cases, sports teams are required to use set of templates provided by their league. And yet they are desperate to attract younger consumers. And there was a project that we have been talking about where, we might reimagine that e-commerce experience. But what I think you're saying is it's not just reimagining the e-commerce experience. It's also not replicating the team store that is the physical destination that might be in the arena where that team plays their home matches or home games. It's something that maybe learns from both environments, that sort of leverages what we know drives the transactional behavior we're looking for in an e-commerce environment, but also allows some of the tactile and subconscious absorption of information content and really emotional connection to a team that you might feel when you're in that team store. Is that right, where we're somewhere that combines both of those areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, sports is a fantastic thing because ultimately it's not only an emotional connection, it's really getting into the mystery of this, right? So why are you actually a fan? And so to take that, I mean, imagine now, this is not about as you said, the store, right? So, it's not building the perfect store where you get all the information about all the products. That you can do anyway. That's a digital experience. We can put as many information in there, much more than you could get in any physical store. That's very easy to do. What's really interesting is why are you in this store? And here's now the magic, right? So it's access, right? We can create access virtually into areas where you normally, in no physical store, would have any access to. So I'll give you one example, right? The holy spot, unreachable for most fans ever, the locker room. So the deepest core of where the team really is formed, where the magic happens, where the mystery comes from, where the coach gives the last words before the game, etc. So why is this very centric, condensed area, place, and moment even, why isn't that the entrance gate, so to say, to an e-commerce experience? Because I think that's what really becomes interesting, about how do we make this really entertaining, and how do we bring really the mystery of fandom, entertainment, of culture, all this into the e-commerce experience.
I love the way that you put that you're really in many ways unlocking a mystery as to why people make the choices they make to spend the time in certain places, purchasing certain items, aligning with certain brands, expressing their passion in certain ways. And that is evident when you're at a sporting event. You can see it in the stands. But it is definitely not evident when you shop for a jersey on today's e-commerce sites. And so how can you actually bridge that gap? We think about that, as you know, when we're working with partners and bringing them into environments like Roblox or Fortnite Creative. And it's just fascinating to think about the ways that we can help them turn their own web presence and their mobile presence into a place where that emotional connection starts to really have more depth and more meaning, and isn't just created by a video that has good editing and good music.
And to go even further there, what's really mind-boggling to me, if you compare the e-commerce store of an NBA team to a football team, that's one thing. These are two sports teams. Compare the same e-commerce store to a heavy metal band and to Chanel Haute Couture, and it's still the same e-commerce store. You're still surfing white grids with product, probably cutouts. So there's nothing unique about this. There's basically, it almost feels like the brand is giving away at this point when it comes to commerce. You almost give away the entire brand identity and say, well, that's how it needs to be. It needs to be a white grid. You can scroll down, there's all your products. You can filter. But again, you can filter Coco Chanel handbags, and you can filter t-shirts from heavy metal or whatever. So, and that for me is like, I don't understand that. We can make very unique, very ownable experiences that are really completely unique to your brand in the most critical moment. Basically, the moment you decide for the purchase, you want to really buy something, really buying in, literally. So into the brand, the artist, whatever it is, it's the same principle for all of them. In that very moment, you leave people basically away in this experience desert where somebody once said, this is how it has to look like. And it has a history why it is the way it is today, but we definitely don't have to do it this way anymore. So we're much, much further in technology.
I mean, that's such a great observation that you can, scroll through the same interface and get a handbag or a jersey or, or a heavy metal T-shirt. How have you applied this perspective, this thinking, these design principles, this idea of spatial design and computing? How have you applied it in some of the work that you've done to date? Are there some examples of brands you've worked with, solutions you've brought to life where you think this is starting to exhibit the potential that we're discussing here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is that simple. The point we just talked about is basically the critical nucleus of everything, and really start to question yourself, the client, the partners, about so what is it really you want to be, you are, what's really your DNA, and can we translate your DNA of an event or whatever, right? You entirely for brand, can we translate this into a commerce experience, a brand experience, a concert, whatever it is, a museum? So, but really, mostly, and this for me and us as a team, the most critical part, which is sometimes interesting when clients come to us, right? They already have a long checklist of technology. We need this, we need that, and it needs to do this, it needs to do that. And so, well, forget about technology entirely, right? And delete this completely from your conceptual thinking. Just really think about it. What do you really try to do with your fan, your customer, your client on the other side? So what's in an ideal world? No technology restriction whatsoever. What is it really you try to do? So, and what is it in your DNA, so to say, that you want to bring through in this experience? So, and there's plenty of examples. So,
well, I know you've done some work in the music business. I know you've done work for a company I referenced earlier, and would love, what's an example of something that you really feel like nailed it and you're proud of, even if you would do it differently today because technology has advanced since then, or you learned from it? What are some highlights?
Here's some highlights. I mean, we've done an album launch for 21 Pilots a couple of years ago. And there was actually the band and the creative team of the band. They did a fantastic job over years, actually, to start spinning a narrative together. And this album launch was basically, it was just the pinnacle of a narrative, of storytelling that went over years almost. And they basically created this narrative put this narrative into the fan base for years. So it was obviously our obligation to create now an experience, and Backladder was an experience as a portal basically to the live concert for the album launch. So in this portal, it was live for 8 weeks, and it was completely embedded in the narrative. Backladder was a big monitoring room, screening room with a lot of surveillance cameras and all of that. We had 17 different screens. They all had basically content that changed almost daily. So we had this live for 8 weeks, and we had incredible results there. Where and to give you just one number, so we had about 4.5 million people visiting this experience. And the average session time of this experience, right? Most websites try to get to a minute. So, and that's pretty decent. We have 47 minutes was the average.
47?
47 minutes, yes.
Wow.
And so because it was literally everything there was, the e-commerce part, the shop, right? So the tickets, the premieres for music videos we had there, all of this But it was all completely embedded in this narrative that the band started to tell, and the story they started to tell months and years ago. So when this was perfectly also then shifted into the beginning of the show, actually, in fact, the beginning of the show and the beginning of the live concert ultimately started in that very room that we created and moved from there now into the live concert. And so I'm so seamless storytelling. So it was a really very interesting result. And one other episode was quite fun. I mean, I can't get too deep into numbers there, but I remember one of the very first experiences we've built was for Billie Eilish, her concert. And we had a long conversation with the label back then about how long pre-show experience actually could be for a concert. It was also a live concert back then. So and there was a pretty clear opinion that it should never be longer than 10 minutes because you start losing people and you start losing your audience. So we were pretty triggered by that. So we decided to make it 3 hours. And in fact, we had 60% of the audience in the end in the experience 2 hours before the show. They didn't leave. So, and that was a very, very simple, as you said earlier, we would not do this today this way, but it was a very simple spatial experience. It was 4 different rooms, super minimalistic in the end, if you look at this a couple of years later. But yeah, it was actually, it was true to her, true to the brand, basically. It was interesting.
So I don't want to gloss over the importance of engagement that you just revealed. 47 minutes on a specific web page. This was not going through a website and clicking around and picking up different pieces of content, going from URL to URL. This was one place where fans ended up, and there was activity and content and information and exploration that kept them there for 47 minutes. That's extraordinary, especially given what I imagine was the demographic of that audience. It wasn't 35 plus. It was younger consumers. And it speaks to what we tell our brands and IP owners regularly, which is younger consumers spend the majority of their time in immersive spaces. Now, right now, that's dominated predominantly by games. The rest of the time that they're on their digital devices, if they're not just communicating directly with their friends, they're watching videos on social media sites. They're not visiting web pages. And yet you proved that younger consumers can be compelled by a web page to spend more time than they spend on an average Roblox session, more time than they spend watching an average video. And it was a web page. That's remarkable.
And that hits a very interesting point. You just mentioned this. So we also had a lot of conversation over the last years about, well, what's the platform we should go to, right? Because people are Roblox, people are playing this, playing that, and so on. Basically, like the last 10 years, 15 years, so we have to be on YouTube, we have to be on Instagram, because that's the only place people would be. And what we try to show is also in various different instances, be it music, be it art museums, etc., just show now you can actually create a very unique, ownable world that actually is yours, that is your place. And there's a way to bring people in. There's actually a mechanism how to really do this very effectively, how to tie in social media and all this, but to really create something that's your territory with your rules, meaning your functionalities. People do what you want them to do and not just what the platform offers you to do. And that is, for us, very critical when you think this further about how is a Chanel show differently, or Louis Vuitton very differently to, again, some indie band or some automotive brand. So they should have very unique, and they must come to unique answers. And I feel what's true for the e-commerce experience, the same for most brand experience, right? When you think about this is happening basically on social media platforms. So what can you do? You can like it, you can share it, and leave a comment. That's basically across the board all you can do, as if this is the end of a human experience. Well, it's like such a limitation, and it's the same for everyone. And that's
true.
Something that we cannot accept. I think there's there's a beauty and really meaningful experiences, and just let people do what's in this very moment true to the moment, to the brand, what you want to do there. And if we can cater to that, I think this can be very engaging and can create really extraordinary results.
Well, there is other science around it, which is just on a high level that the deepest memories you hold on to throughout your life are from experiences, experiential engagements. They're not from watching a movie or watching a sports match on television. You might remember going to the match if you were there in person, but the deepest memories are triggered experientially. And so why not aspire to create experiences through digital screens that can have a lasting impression and make you want to come back and be there again and have that memory, have that emotional connection more than once. We look at a lot of the things that are happening in the market. Clearly, one of the areas which we've touched upon, e-commerce, is getting a lot of attention. There are innumerable brands who have decided that they're going to create a 3D commerce experience. The phrase immersive commerce gets thrown out quite a bit. Virtual commerce gets referenced regularly. By the time this podcast is live, it will be maybe a month or so from the launch of a relatively significant retailer entering this space in Macy's, who just launched, I think they call it M-Style Lab. There are references like Ralph Lauren and Lululemon Fashion, even Walmart creating the Cultureverse. What's your thought? And you can take any one example, or maybe it's more of a general point of view about how these efforts are coming to life, and do they represent really what A, is possible to achieve today, and B, something that is compelling. And I'll certainly share a point of view on those as well.
I mean, first of all, I absolutely welcome everyone who is building a spatial experience of any sort, because I feel there's a lot of every one of these experiences helps to understand what we actually can do, and the transformation that is, my perspective, about to happen. It's on its way. And you mentioned earlier, Apple's announcement was so far only an announcement. I think there will be a lot more movement and a lot more shaking once it's really launching. So, and this will accelerate quite drastically this whole development. But I absolutely welcome everybody who tries to do anything in this environment. Is most of these experiences really representing what's possible? I don't think so. It's absolutely not. The other question is also, and that's probably what I am very cognizant, is it incrementally presenting what people are probably getting used to? So because possible is so much more, but it's also, I think, there's a certain way for people to go from understanding and how this actually works, and it can be very quickly very overwhelming. So, and therefore, I think what we see right now is very, very small steps incrementally into these worlds, into these experiences. But as I said before, what's not really happening yet, from most things I've seen, is really a complete reimagining of this experience, or a completely new take to get into a commerce experience, right? So, and that's, I think, which we're hopefully going to see a lot more in the future, which then also brings us into more interesting real experiences. And just to go back to that word, I mean, you just mentioned, right, we all talk about brand experiences, and experiential creates much more memories. But it's so funny because, I mean, we're talking about brand experiences for decades. But I think now we have the time to really create experiences, because what we said before was basically, we can go to the website, it's a great brand experience. But now it's actually watching some videos, looking at pictures. It's not really an experience, right? Jumping from a bridge, that's an experience, and that you'll not forget for the rest of our lives. That creates so much more memories. And most websites you ever went through, it didn't have the same impact. So So, but I think now brands really have this opportunity to create real experiences. And that's true even for all these commerce things where, as I said earlier, it's so exciting to think about these opportunities now where it doesn't need to be any more grid. We don't have to scroll down through products. We can find actually completely new entry points. So why isn't the concert itself the e-commerce store? Why is the locker room not the minutes? And that's a whole different component which we haven't talked about yet, but it's also, for me, it's space, right? But it's also time. Time and space is so close connected, right? So it's we can be very specific about moments in time. And and again, why is the moment before the team goes out on the pitch that moment? Why is that not your shopping experience? This 5 minutes before the game and so on.
I think you're absolutely right. And I look at the experiences I mentioned. I don't, want to be overly focused on anything that's launched recently, because ultimately, to your point, any brand that's investing in this space is good for the ecosystem and wouldn't ever want to discourage that investment. It's important to our business, to your business. But I will say, I generally see experiences in the market today that offer one of two directions for the end user. Direction number one is I'm going into a new type of web page, but all it really provides is a 3D picture and clickable 3D items that are presented in a static manner as part of that picture. Maybe that is a nice way to incrementally present the idea of three-dimensional activity in an e-commerce moment, but it feels, frankly, like websites that were being built with Flash in the early 2000s and a little bit beyond. The other direction is you enter a space where you're able to move around, whether it's first person or third person and you have an avatar. You're able to move around, but especially if you're trying to drive a purchase activity, you're not really moving around with any purpose. You're moving around in what amounts to a bit of a cavernous environment, and it feels like there's some random shopping item thrown into it. So it just happens to be that a brand decided to make this 3D room that you can look around and move around within, a place to have you shop, whereas they just as easily could have had you watch a video, or they just as easily could have had you play a game. There's no real purposeful design to whatever their intended strategy should have been when they sought to enter this world in the first place. And so I guess to your point earlier, these experiences are not demonstrating what's possible. And while I want the investment, I want to see an experience that stands out and that transforms what's possible through spatial design as we've been discussing it. Because at that point, what you and I do in the different ways that we do it, and often can do as partners, will skyrocket.
100%. And so avatars are one of my favorite topics, right? Because I feel it's 99% of the experiences you really spend your time figuring out where to actually go and if anything is actually happening anywhere. So, and it's basically lost. And it's just one thought I have about this, right? When you think about it. So, and that brings me back to this discussion about human nature. So there seems to be this general assumption about, if you can run around in this world and if you can spend this time, these multiplayer modes, I can spend this experience with hundreds of other people, then it is fantastic. And I feel sometimes, actually, think about it, right? somebody gives you $10,000 and says for the weekend, so whatever you want to do, here's a private jet, do whatever you want to do and just have fun, right? 2 days off. And literally not a lot of things come to my mind where I think, well, actually, it's only worth doing it if there's 500 people with me doing the exact same thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't go.
It's a big private
They would
plane.
open the Louvre for me in Paris, right, for Friday night, but I just prefer not to go because I would be the only one there. So it's like, well, not true. So there's not many experiences where only if 500 other people do it together with me, only then it's fun. So, and I think this is what I said before, this conceptually, there is so much to do. And the fact that we have this technology, that's not the solution. That's not the answer. All right. We have an avatar that can run around. That's not an answer. That's a piece of technology you might or you might not use. And there are cases where it makes sense, and there are cases where it makes no sense at all. So, and, but yeah, and I think but it's pure logic and human nature. I mean, novelty works for a moment. And then I think now, when we have seen enough avatars running around through some cyberpunk worlds with flying dolphins, then that becomes old, and then we can probably focus on real experiences that really make sense. And so, yeah.
I like the way you sort of put a button on that. So let me just ask you maybe one or two questions as we conclude our conversation. One is, what are you most excited to create that you haven't created yet?
I'm absolutely convinced that brands have the ability, and today the technology, as I said, to create different brand experiences. But what we're really excited about is we have the ability with brands to create cultural moments, and be it in music and art and all sorts of things, and create cultural experiences and entertaining experiences that we have never seen before, because simply we never had the ability to do that. So and I've done a couple of big shows for international artists, Lady Gaga, Billie Eilish, we mentioned. So, and when I see the budgets spent on shows like that and compare that to an average automotive commercial, 1 minute long. So, and now you compare this to the Super Bowl budgets, etc. So simply the music world has never seen anything like that in terms of budgets really spent on this. So, and again, like the U2 example is a perfect example. This tiny first step into this direction of creating a spatial show for U2 in the MSG sphere. So I think we have so many more entertainment and culture experiences we can create, and we will create in the future, powered by brands, combining these two worlds. And that's what really is exciting to me, to use spatial really to create completely new forms of culture, stuff we've never seen before.
You know, I thought of this in a conversation with another person in the space just earlier this week. There are kids today who, if you ask the question, what was your first concert? They will tell you Travis Scott in Fortnite. I would bet that that's an inconceivable answer to any executive over the age of 40, maybe even over the age of 35. To them, the notion that felt like an actual first experience that is the same, using the same word, concert, as someone in an older generation who thinks of that as, I had to go to a stadium, I was with 50,000 people screaming my head off. It's a complete disconnect. And yet, for younger consumers, it's natural. My first concert was Travis Scott in Fortnite. I look forward to saying that in meetings and seeing people's eyes sort of squint and their heads turn, and it's so powerful as a simple statement. And I guess it leads me to my last question, which is, what should a brand ask themselves? What are the one or two questions that a CMO, a brand innovator should be asking in order to be in front of younger demographics in the powerful ways that we've been talking about?
I think there are two questions for me. So the first thing I would ask them is, so imagine a customer, a client. So in a personal interaction, what is the one thing you would really like to do, what you would like to achieve? How would you like to be able to talk to your customer? Truly, take everything aside, all restriction, everything there is. So, and then let's be really honest about this moment. And then let's try to deconstruct it and see if the answer might most likely be that a spatial experience might get you very close to what you're actually trying to really do in this conversation. So, and I feel, as I said, so we went to websites and we've built all these digital ecosystems to make sure we get a little bit of bits and pieces everywhere. And overall, there is some engagement, there is some traction. But is any of this experience really what you ultimately try to do? So that would be my one question. And the other question is, bring it back to the culture and the entertaining part is, what's really, how would you really like to excite people about your brand, and what is it there you could do and you could imagine in collaboration with culture, with artists of any sort to enable moments and ultimately moments, own formats that no one has seen before. Because to bring your Travis Scott example even one step further is like, for me, it really gets interesting when you think about stuff that it doesn't even have a name yet. Is it really a concert, right? For you too, it's still okay to say that was a concert. It just was an immersive, mind-blowing experience as a concert experience. But where it really gets interesting if things don't have a name anymore. So what is it we're actually seeing here? And it's a music experience of any sort, but is it a concert or? So let's find new names for these things, and then as a brand, be the first to introduce that to the world. Be the first to introduce a piece of content, a piece of culture that doesn't even have a name yet.
And it's going to be experiential, so it'll form a deep memory in the minds of your audience. Mike, it's been just a great pleasure to have this conversation. I didn't say this in the beginning, but you are my first international guest, and that's exciting. I'm going to have to, lean in and find more people who are willing to be up in the middle of the night to have a discussion with me. But again, thank you, Mike Kaler, the co-founder and chief creative officer of Plan.net Studios, formerly Lily Studios, now part of the Service Plan Group. Mike, I look forward to talking again, and really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure and really enjoyed this, and I look forward to everything we can do together. And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of Beam. Please don't forget to like and comment and share and subscribe so you get all future episodes. Really appreciate you being here today.